Alright, you guys, this is your notes on wetlands. This is video E4.p1-9. These are going to be some fill-in-the-blank notes. I have a fair amount of pictures in this so you can see the types of wetlands that we're talking about. But also, especially with this type of note, and for some of them, I don't know that you're writing anything, make sure you read that. Make sure you look over that because you're responsible still for knowing the different types of wetlands and how they are important. Remember, it's not enough to do it. We need to learn it. So let's get this one started. So, looking at all this, we can go ahead and fill in our blanks, but it says a wetland is defined as land characterized by the presence of water at a frequency and duration sufficient to support, and under normal circumstances does support, wetland vegetation or aquatic life, and is commonly referred to as a bog, swamp, or marsh. So those are types of wetlands. Basically, the type of vegetation is going to dictate the type of wetland. Okay, so if we have water-loving vegetation, wetland vegetation, it's a wetland. Okay. So the types we'll talk about: marshes, swamps, bogs, and fens. For marshes, they're defined as wetlands, frequently or always filled with water. Okay, so characterized by soft-stemmed vegetation, adapted to saturated or always full of water soil conditions. So soft-stemmed vegetation is what dictates marsh. Marshes generally have standing water from less than 1 inch up to 3 feet. The amount of water will fluctuate or vary seasonally or from year to year. If you have a particularly dry year, this could be on the lower end, or a particularly wet year, it could be on the higher end, towards 3 feet. They're dominated by, again, those soft stem plants like cattails and rushes, usually at least half covered with vegetation as opposed to open water. And in Michigan, marshes are often found on the edges of rivers or lakes or ponds, any lowland or depression, in swales between sand dunes, or maybe even swales between agricultural fields. Well, it could look something like this lower area that we're seeing here. This would be signified as a marsh. Almost looks like there's a pasture out here. They recharge the groundwater with moderate stream flow by providing water to streams. So if it's a dry time and the stream is getting low, marshes in that area will actually release some of that water to the stream to keep the water levels up during periods of drought. Marshes also reduce damage caused by flooding by slowing down and storing flood water and then releasing it as needed, sort of. So kind of like a big sponge. All wetlands are really good for that. It also says it filters, so pollutants are going to settle to the substrate of the floor of the marsh. And again, that's something common really to all wetlands. They control flooding and help reduce drought to nearby bodies of water, and filter out pollutants. So again here, the vegetation of microorganisms can filter out excess nutrients, which ultimately can be pollutants, things like phosphorus or nitrates, things we find in fertilizer. We don't need these in our water supply. We get algae blooms and things like that, causing excessive plant growth, and our wetlands are very good for taking that stuff out, filtering it. So preserving the quality of surface waters is a main point here. They're so good, we found that we were actually building marshes and other types of wetlands to treat wastewater from farms or parking lots or small sewage plants. Another type is a non-tidal marsh. These are the most prevalent ones in North America, the United States, mostly fresh water. And again, they're occurring along streams or poorly drained low areas, depressions, places like that. There's a good example of one. You can see there's a lot of plant cover here, probably 50-50 with open water. And again, it says easy to recognize non-tidal marsh by its characteristic soils, vegetation, and wildlife. Remember, we're going to have these soft stem plants. I give some examples here. So saturated soils, and then we have some examples of some of the wildlife here as well. More specifically, types of marshes are prairie potholes, playa lakes, not playa lakes, playa lakes, vernal pools or ponds, and wet meadows. So in a vernal pond, it's a small body of standing water. Usually we get them in the spring from meltwater from all the snow and ice. And then again in the fall, in the wet part of the fall. My dog hacking something up. Knock it off, Bailey. So we get these in the wet periods of the year. For Michigan, that would be spring and fall. They generally dry up in the summer. Something like this. A wet meadow looks like a shallow field. Really no open water, but the idea though is that it is wetland vegetation, usually 100% cover of wetland or water-loving grasses or something like that. It says wet meadows are often a transition zone between aquatic and upland communities with pretty wet or saturated and mucky soils. So you can imagine that it even looks here that this is a place, this lighter area is a place where there's probably standing water for quite some time, to the point where not much vegetation was able to even grow. But all this surrounding area is a wetland vegetation, soft stem plants, just some grasses. And this soil, if you were going to walk on it at this time of the year for this photo, probably pretty squishy, mucky. Again, for the what are they good for portion here, it's really always the same. Okay, they're going to slow flooding. They take out excess nutrients and filter water. It's a good home for wildlife. All sorts of these things. They're very, very important parts of the hydrosphere system. So swamps. Swamps are wetlands dominated by woody plants. Okay, so we're going to have two types here in a moment. So we have saturated soils, they're always wet. Standing water during certain times of the year, during most times of the year. Highly organic soils of swamps from a thick, black, nutrient-rich environment and the growths of water-tolerant trees. So we have that very rich, dark, organic soil. And this would be a swamp. Okay, woody plants. Okay, hardwood trees. Okay, same idea for what they're good for. So two types, forested and shrub, and they are exactly what they say they are. Okay, forested swamps have dominant woody plants, mostly saturated. They can become dry during the summer months, but very often will stay saturated. And I kind of give a list here of all types of trees that could be there. Bogs. Bogs are pretty unique. They are found on saturated. It says acid peat soils that are low in nutrients. So one of the most important things here is they're acidic soils for bogs, and they're low in nutrients because of that. Okay, so they have low shrubs or herbs and a few tree species. It says on a mat of sphagnum moss. Some bogs are totally overgrown with this mat of moss. It can be like a foot thick, um, and it's thick enough to the point where very often you can walk on it, but you'll realize that you're floating. You're kind of moving up and down, and you would then hopefully realize, uh-oh, I'm on a bog, and I should probably get off of it because there's water underneath this, and if I slip through, it might be really hard to get out. It says acid-tolerant plants are found in and around bogs, so we have some pretty unique plants that live there sometimes, um, as well as insects. Insect-eating sundews and pitcher plants, things like that. Bogs are normally found in the northern part of Michigan, very often in glacial lakes. Here's a picture of one, and this is not that thick mat of sphagnum mosses, but it is a mat. Northern bogs often form those glacial lakes I just mentioned, and there can be a fair amount of open water or completely closed in. The natural life cycle of a lake is to slowly fill in with sediments and organic matter as it dies and falls to the bottom. It creates soils, and so over time, lakes are filling in. Bogs are sort of an extreme example of that. Fens are kind of like bogs, except the soils are opposite. They're more alkaline or basic, not acidic. And it's because fens are really created because the water is passing through calcareous or calcium deposits in the soils, which makes them more basic. So fens have a higher plant diversity. Not many plants can live in those acidic soils of bogs. Very unique species of plants. So in this case, we have a higher plant diversity because of more nutrients. So the key here, more alkaline or basic soils, and therefore higher plant diversity than bogs. And there's some pretty familiar pictures here. This is just talking about fens. It says like bog fens are mostly found in the northern hemisphere, as opposed to the southern hemisphere, occurring in the northern parts of the United States here, generally with low temperatures, short growing seasons, kind of like us here in Michigan. Lots of precipitation, high humidity, all factors of where we live here in Michigan. And again, fens are good for what all wetlands are good for. Okay, including preventing or reducing the risk of floods, improving water quality, providing habitat for plants and animals, wildlife viewing, recreation, things like that. Okay, so I know these were kind of some quick notes. The main points here are: what are the different types of wetlands? Marshes, swamps, bogs, and fens. Maybe know a little bit about them, but more importantly even is what are the wetlands good for? You've got to know what they're good for. Okay, what purposes do they serve the environment?